Lesson 2.1, Integers and Absolute Value. Integers consist of negative numbers, 0, and positive numbers. Negative integers are any integer less than 0. Positive integers are any integer greater than 0. Absolute value is the distance between a number and 0 on a number line. Because when you measure distance, you cannot measure a negative distance. Absolute value is always positive. Write this down. Opposites. Opposites are two numbers that are the same direction, same distance from 0 on the number line, but on opposite sides. Okay, these just have different signs. Example 1. The table shows the low temperatures for 5 days. Which day had the lowest temperature? To find which day had the lowest temperature, graph each integer on the number line. You can go ahead and do that while I do it as well. Remember, you put the dot in between the plus sign or the tick marks. Now that you've graphed it, you can see that the lowest temperature is the one furthest to the left, which is Thursday, -8 degrees Celsius. Please pause the video at this time and order the integers from least to greatest. If you need to use the number line, please do. Number 1, we have 7, -5, 9, -10, and -2. So the order from least to greatest would be -10, -5, -2, 7, and 9. Number 2, make sure that you have graphed the points. The order from least to greatest is -50, -25, 0, 30, and 45. Example 2. A seagull is flying at an altitude of 107 feet. And a shark is swimming at a depth of -112 feet relative to sea level. Which animal is further from sea level? Let's talk about altitude and depth. Altitude is going to be higher than sea level. So if you're at sea level, altitude is going to be higher. So it's going to be a positive number. But if you're below sea level, then it's going to be a negative number. But because we are measuring the distance from sea level to the seagull, we want to use the absolute value. We use these signs for absolute value, these two long lines, okay, longer than a 1, longer than an L. So what's the absolute value of 107? Absolute value is always positive, so it's 107. How about the distance from sea level to the shark? Here's the absolute value signs. It's always positive, so change this number to a positive, 112. That means that the shark is further from sea level. Example 3, finding opposites. Remember, opposites just mean that they have different signs because they're on opposite sides of 0 on a number line. So the opposite of 9 is -9. Just change the sign. The opposite of -14, +14. Part C, you have to find the opposite of the absolute value. So we always start with the absolute value. What is the absolute value of -8? Well, it becomes a +8. So then what's the opposite of 8? That would be -8. By the way, you may see it written where they put a negative sign. So they'll say -9, and they're actually saying what's the opposite of 9, and that would be -9. Or they put -14, What's the opposite of negative 14? That's positive 14. Here, they could write it with negative outside the absolute value. Always do the absolute value first. Think of it as a grouping symbol, if you will. So this is 8, and then bring down the negative. What's the opposite of 8? And that's negative 8. Pause the video and make sure that you solve 3 through 6. You are finding the opposite and the absolute value. Number 3, the opposite would be 1. The absolute value would also be 1. For number 4, the opposite, this would become a negative 105. The absolute value would become positive or stay the same as positive 105. For number 5, the opposite would be negative 18. Absolute value would be positive 18 because it stays the same. 6, okay, the opposite. So remember, we want to solve the absolute value first. The absolute value of negative 60 is 6. Now ask yourself, what's the opposite of 60? Negative 60. And what's the absolute value of 60? 60.